personal criticism, feminist theory, and dog writing. Like Hepburn too, Susan's work is characterized by excelling across an astonishing wide range. She has the startling and envy-inducing capacity to change minds and hearts about whatever animal topic she's writing on, whether that's visually impaired fictional detectives and their dogs in animal stories, the personal and cultural meaning of Jane Goodall in Sweet Jane, or the racist biopolitics driving genocides and extinctions, and the narratives of love that can resist them in her profound and moving book, Love in a Time of Slaughters. A last thing that made Hepburn truly unique was the persistent and quietly radical influence of her persona, and this is true of Susan too. Across her career, Susan has shown us how to be an academic by fostering and caring for our field through her enormous, unstinting editorial efforts. Count them, 8 co-edited volumes and nearly 50 series-edited books across 2 series, 20 years of editorial work for the field's key journal, attention and care to fledge undergraduate researchers, and supportive collaborations with junior scholars and, frankly, nearing golden pond ones like me. I won't push the comparison any further, though if it was up to me, Susan would have 4 Oscars, and I don't doubt that if you need someone to rock a culotte or assuage a recalcitrant terrier like Hepburn in Bringing Up Baby, then Susan's your gal too. So I'm truly delighted to introduce Susan McHugh, a scholar without whom I certainly wouldn't be here today. I'm going to hand over and let you go. Thanks, Susan.
The one thing about introductions like that is now you all will be disappointed. If you don't know me already, in which case, you know Bob. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so spoiler. Oh, do I? So spoiler alert, for those of you who are coming here to hear about plants, it turned out to be too adventurous, my initial proposal. So I won't be talking about plants today after all, in order to focus on a very specific scientific schism that has to do with animal fables. So I hope you guys will agree with that choice. Yeah, so it's about fairy tales, but it's also kind of about fables, or at least the comic has the same general gist of my talk here today, that my animal life can be fabulous, fabular, but the devil is in the details, like authorship, agency, and cultural context that make things like animal consent an issue or not. But where are my manners? Bob, thank you for that very generous introduction, and thank you so much for, yeah, just being there for me for so much. This could be a love fest, so I'm not going to do that. But just in general, know that I am so honored to be here among old friends and new. And I also just want to thank Cowrie for your tremendous efforts in making this all possible for us. So round of applause for Cowrie. This talk is dedicated to my friend and lifelong animal advocate and literary animal studies scholar, Marian Copeland, also known as Ronnie to friends. Ronnie passed away last month, and it's very sad for me in part because she's always constantly sent me titles to read, and this was one of them. So I'm very thankful to her and glad to have this opportunity to sort of pay it forward to all of you too. So because Wimpenny's lecture for this project is archived, thank you, Cowrie, for that, on the Animal Fables website, I won't give you an extensive summary of her project, but instead I will just stick to a few key points that I think are relevant to set up what I'm going to be talking about today. There, Wimpenny explains that her initial inspiration for this wonderful book was the published results of Bird and Emery's 2011 study that lent itself to popular media hype for proving Aesop's fable of the crow and pitcher, which, as you'll recall, is the one in which the bird drops stones into a vessel to raise the water level in order to get a reward, with the moral generally understood to be necessity is the mother of invention. Wimpenny notes that the study's significance now includes the tremendous public attention that it attracted to the already mounting evidence on corvid behavior that indicates that they have a cognitive toolkit of traits that allows these birds to respond to environmental challenges flexibly and opportunistically. Wimpenny also acknowledges that critics of this approach are out there and within science, and she generously characterizes this healthy debate, she says, among trained animal behaviorists like her as a positive thing. People should have differences of opinion. We should be talking about these things moving forward. Yet she also observes, and I think this is a pretty interesting point among this group especially, that for the people who study them, crows and apes have hit upon strikingly similar solutions to solve challenges in their physical and social worlds using different brains, different physical apparatuses shaped by different evolutionary processes or different evolutionary pathways, a phenomenon known as evolutionary convergence, that in this case has had the knock-on effect of breaking down the barriers that determined which animals should be studied for cognition. No longer are primates the only acceptable group, she argues. Today, the thriving field of comparative cognition includes a much more representative sample of species. I don't know about you guys, but I kind of knew about the neuroscience stuff, not Ken and Ergon's neuroscience of people who study animals. That is utterly fascinating. So thank you for that earlier talk today. But I kind of knew that we're living among a revolution in understandings of and perceptions of the intelligence of birds, and corvids in particular, and that has been advanced significantly by neuroscience studies within our lifetimes. But even though I knew a lot of this before I read Wimpenny, I hadn't really thought of the effect on primate behavior research, let alone for scientists trained in that very narrow field. So teasing out the nuances, these nuances leads me to another main inspiration for my talk today, Kaori Nagai's amazing book, Imperial Beast Fables, Animals, Cosmopolitanism, and the British Empire, in which she does such a brilliant job of identifying the power dynamics that make animal fables important for critical reflection on our pasts and futures together with other animals. The topic that I thought I would pursue here today, namely the popular scientific framing of animal fables as a hot topic in science versus scientists' rejection of plant fables as a hot mess, that also has deeper roots in the pages of Imperial Beast Fables. But again, in the interest of time, I'm just focusing here on animal stories. Careful readers of this wonderful book will remember that Kaori begins her book with an anecdote from B.F. Skinner, the behavioral scientist known largely these days for inventing the Skinner box, a kind of cage featuring levers that trigger rewards or punishments to lab animals when they push said levers, thereby demonstrating what Skinner termed their own operant conditioning. It's a theory of learning maybe best known today through those of us who've gone through corporate training, or anyone who's a dog trainer. You know, positive reinforcement is what people are into. Students of Donna Haraway all know this too. Yet, I think filling in more context, Nagai presents a story that Skinner himself tells about having trained himself to go to work in his own laboratory as a kind of rat in the Skinner box kind of fable. More to her point, Skinner's moral or human in lesson invites only to shut down a rat-centric reading. As she explains, Skinner's story shows how certain types of animal testing, like the operant conditioning box experiments, may themselves operate like a fable, in that humans observe animals mainly to acquire greater understandings of themselves. Yet, as Nagai explains further, fabled and scientific stories alike also can attest to the subversive power when animal agency is acknowledged through animals' own capacities for communicating. Despite its clearly anthropocentric interpretive frame, which seems calculated to suppress any animal agency, animals speak in a fable. The genre gives expression to the speech of animals, including their silence and the silencing of their voices. The key detail that Nagai identifies in Skinner's story is that the rats that he trains to press levers in boxes, the levers sound out da-da, da-da-da, da-da, da-da-da, da-da, da-da-da over and over again, which he starts to translate in his mind as da-da, da-da-da, you'll never get out, da-da, da-da-da, you'll never get out. And of course, for Skinner, the message that he gets is that it's all about him, the poor old scientist stuck in his laboratory, never to be free. But what a difference Nagai makes when she suggests reframing the story through its potentials for animal-centric interpretation of da-da, da-da-da as the voice of the non-human, which, when transcribed more faithfully, says something about the rats' lives, too. After all, it's only Skinner's rats for whom never really means never getting out, never to be freed from the dull repetitions of the Skinner box. 50 years after Skinner's retirement, which itself intriguingly coincided with the rise of the animal rights movement, support is emerging for animal-centric reading at the crossroads of science and folk and fable traditions, albeit haltingly. According to Wimpenny, a main source of criticism against this kind of pro-animal reading of fables with science is comparative psychologist Daniel Povinelli. Together with folklorist Brendan Barker, Povinelli co-edited the Aesop's Fable Paradigm, an unlikely intersection of folklore and science. And the titular qualification unlikely kind of tells you what you're in for with this one. I see in the chapter titled Anthropomorphomania and the Rise of Animal Mind, a Conversation, something more akin to what Nagai reads in Skinner's autobiographical tale, too. There, Povinelli explains his own childhood passion for liberating great apes as leading him to a career of laboratory experimentation on chimpanzee and human children to test theories of mind. I know it's 4:00. If you're hearing, something weird there, if you're hearing some kind of, cognitive dissonance perhaps, then please recall Wimpenny's observation that until the Corvid studies of the last few decades, primates were the only acceptable group for studying non-human cognition among researchers of Povinelli's and my own vintage. Still more disarming, though, in this interview is Povinelli's concession that nothing was gained from a narrow fixation on comparing the minds of ape species strictly with our own. He even characterizes his own life's work in this interview as pointlessly conducting, quote, tests that aren't diagnostic for human higher order thinking any more than they are for chimpanzees. But how does it follow that fable-inspired science is necessarily worse than what he has been up to in his chimp lab? The gist of Povinelli's objection to studies that purport to prove the intelligence of certain species as predicted in examples from fable traditions is not that they lend themselves to gimmicky headlines that misconstrue scientific findings. No, this guy digs in deeper. Prompted by his folklorist interlocutor, Barker's questioning of fables as reflections of human problem solving, Povinelli counters, quote, fables were never about the cognitive ability of anybody, humans or other animals. Rather like his 30 years of working in a chimpanzee lab, one might ask. Yet, for him, it's the Aesop's Fable Paradigm that he insists dooms us to replicate the most reductive aspects of the Skinner legacy. Not being able to make this stuff up, I had to give you a giant block quote here, and I'll read you the last paragraph of this interview, Povinelli's last word at length. I was already getting out of the field at the time. When I read the Aesop's Fable experiments, I said, it's rats pressing levers. That's all it is. It's rats pressing levers. And learning that they get a pellet, I thought, how did we get this far backwards? We returned to rats pressing levers to get a pellet, but now we're wrapping them in the cultural frame of a fable. Just when I thought there was a chance we'd stop with the obsessive search for human higher order abilities in other animals, we're back to lever pressing rats. As non sequiturs, the repetitions here suggest another story. Skinner theorizes that latent behavior surfaces in such nonsensical repetition, da-da, da-da-da, you'll never get out, which he characterizes as a snare that enables the subconscious to verbalize itself, and that Nagai in turn clarifies as also entrapping in order to silence animal stories. What is the chimpanzee story behind Povinelli's repetitions here of lever-pressing rats, lever-pressing rats, lever-pressing rats? Note Povinelli's opening sally. I was already getting out of the field, which sounds like a voluntary move, right? At the time, he also appears to have left the New Iberia Research Center, which, when it hit the news for the worst possible reasons. Povinelli may no longer work there, but it remains one of the largest private captive breeding centers for experimental primate research. The results of his studies conducted there are, in sum, that non-humans are incapable of any theory of mind, conclusions, by the way, that have been sharply contested by other researchers working with the same kinds of animals in other facilities, and that illuminates an otherwise confusing moment earlier in the interview when Povinelli declares the animal narrative agency is an impossibility. Quote, an ape could never tell a story out loud or in its mind. Just to clarify, this is not a point of fact that he has tested, let alone proven. It is presented simply as an intuitive revelation that followed his getting out of 30 years of working with captive chimpanzees, a convergence of paradigm and personal shifts in miserable conditions. Only by looking elsewhere did I discover that Povinelli was getting out of the field at the same time that all chimpanzee work in the New Iberia Research Center was shut down by federal officials following an employee whistleblower's shocking allegations in 2005 that then triggered an extensive underground documentation by the Humane Society of the United States of chimpanzee abuse in 2009. The conditions that they revealed were ranging from grim to horrific, depending on whose description you're reading. But I'll just give you Jane Goodall's thoughts after viewing the film footage from it, which she says, again, direct quote, the conditions were likely to lead to behavioral abnormalities. Public exposure of the compromised quality of your animal behavior science produced in cruel conditions is one reason to get out of the field. But it does not quite explain why fables come to play such a big role in the paradigm shift toward pro-animal science that such departures represent. Thinking with Nagai's reading of Skinner, I wonder also, what if we read the real referent of the claim, an ape could never tell a story out loud or in its head, to be the former monkey mind doctor, the character that Povinelli both has invented and at times even embedded as a lecturing ape, even embodied as a lecturing ape. Here, Povinelli and Barker's more overt forays into fabulation prove particularly telling, for the second half of their book is a meticulously researched standalone piece of animal satire. Who saw that coming? I didn't see that coming. My God, now we're going to get into this. More precisely, the last 100 pages plus of the Aesop's Animal Paradigm book is presented as an appendix titled in a way that purports to compile someone named only Dr. Fomomindo's preliminary notes for a future index of anthropomorphized animal behaviors. While circumstantial evidence identifies Fomomindo as a fictional character, so far as I can tell, the several hundred studies cited and elaborated, sometimes in relation to popular sources, in the hundreds more footnotes of this document, all those citations are going back to real science, actual studies. A preliminary note from the editors attached to this appendix further clarifies that it's an admittedly unusual and eternally unfinished catalog, that was compiled by yet another comparative psychologist assisted by a folklorist, a feint that enables Povinelli and Barker to add a plausible disclaimer that they do not necessarily endorse Fomamindo's methods or his mappings, nor even that they as of yet possess the requisite expertise to judge of the merit of what we understand to be his claims. The somewhat differently titled main text of this document, a future index of anthropomorphized animal fables and their connection to comparative psychology, then starts with an introduction by Fomomindo himself that reads like a fever dream projection of a structural linguistic solution to the problem of animal mind. The doctor asks, could a folk motif index of animal cognition be generated to rigorously catalog human stories and fables and proverbs and myths and legends and myths and anecdotes and jokes and sayings and epics and folk songs that inform, nay, constitute the very wellspring of the scientist's research efforts? Could every entry become a focal point for a future folkloristic, I love this word, investigation? And could such research be conducted under the umbrella of a yet-to-be-named subdiscipline dedicated to quantitative and theoretical investigations of the impact of folklore on the cognitive operations of humans studying animals under the auspices of science? The satirical gambit is that the study of nature is reduced to that of a subset of cultural representations, or the old CP Snow bugbear that culture informs, nay, constitutes science. You are not alone in wondering whether the butt of the joke here is meant to be the animal turn, the cultural turn, or both, hand in glove, smacking down the legacy of scientific humanism. One thing I learned while compiling the book Animal Satire with my brilliant colleague, Bob McHugh, is that it is a genre in which messages and meanings are notoriously difficult to control, and increasingly so for academics desiring to poke fun at their colleagues for their pro-animal and other politically progressive sentiments. Povinelli and Barker certainly don't make it easy to spot what they're up to here. In addition to leaving it to readers to detect that Fomomindo is a fiction, an unexplained absence in the book is any mention of the earlier iterations of this same character. He first appeared in a series of spoof lectures delivered by Povinelli himself, and that's him up there in that image. Povinelli himself playing the part of Fomomindo as accompanied by a chimpanzee who in turn was portrayed by another human actor. This fiction was then developed and staged as a play, all under the same title, Confessions of a Former Monkey Mind Doctor. Who is the real former monkey mind doctor? Where could such a creature exist except in fables? Adding to the confusion in the book, the authors use he, him pronouns for Dr. Fomomindo, whose foil character there is the human folklorist Dr. Folklomindo. But the play is premised on, quote, a girl who falls in love with chimpanzees and grows up to study them as the comparative psychologist, also named Dr. Fomomindo. On stage, she reflects on her long career in conversation with an anthropomorphic projection of her alter ego, staged again by a human actor playing the part of a talking chimpanzee. I have no explanation for this, spoiler alert. I'm just setting these things out there for you guys to think about seriously. Well, the script so far eludes my searches. I can't find the main text of it online, freely available. The detailed program published online clarifies that the play's central questions include: does the persistence of animals in folklore reflect human desires to tell stories about animals or to read them as always about humans? How do animal stories influence the questions that we ask about them, as well as interpretations of the answers that the animals give, assuming, I might add, for Vincent Desprez, who is here with us in the audience, assuming we were asking the right questions in the first place? And what if we took the folklore of science itself into these considerations? Thus, the satirical book chapter seems like an outlier. The form and content of the Fomomindo texts as a whole instead give voice to a distinct feature familiar to animal fables, namely the lecturing ape. I think everyone in this audience, if I just say lecturing ape, an image, one of your favorites, maybe more, coming up to mind. There are lots of lecturing apes in literary and cultural history. My personal favorite is the artist Coco Fusco's 2013 performance art piece titled Observations of Predation in Humans, a lecture by Dr. Zira, animal psychologist. As Bob explained, I am a Planet of the Apes film franchise fan. She is my favorite character, so I was personally well groomed ahead of time to fall in love with this performance piece. And Coco Fusco launched this 5 years before Povinelli's first iteration of Confessions of a Former Monkey Mind Doctor. And Fusco traveled around with it. It was freely available online. I don't know if there was any direct influence, but I think just the fact that they're sort of coexisting into the 21st century, or co-emerging, let's just say, I think is pretty interesting. Fusco's lecture is an animal satire that more directly adapts the fable tradition of an animal put in a privileged position to critique the follies and frailties of humans, only more specifically embodying herself the role of the monkey mind doctor actively. No former qualification there. If I do get a chance to read or see the Fomomindo play, I promise to deliver my own report to this academy on how the fluidity of gender, genre, and species might further inform questions about the folklore of science with great apes. For now, and by way of conclusion, perhaps it's enough to just think about what sets the Barker-Povinelli reaction against animal fables and science quite apart from what Winpenny is up to in hers. One huge difference with her book is that she deliberately calls attention to the context of our current era of anthropogenic mass extinction in framing our ethical obligation to examine fables as potential sources of harm to non-human animals, which Kari Nagai has done with this project so brilliantly as well, that we're all here participating in. A responsible approach to storytelling involves updating with the latest understandings of the science of animal behavior to consider whether the fable has been appropriately cast, and if not, then what other species might be better placed to step into that role. Recalling Barker and Povinelli's insistence that the fictional Fomomindo's folk motif index of animal cognition remains incomplete, I would add that it's heartening, too, to see Winpenny already anticipating this in her book, which was published simultaneously with theirs. It's heartening to find common ground already outlined in Winpenny's own concession that her project can only ever offer a partial perspective, that summarizing every important study, person, and theoretical advance would be a gargantuan effort for the most seasoned researcher, and that these conditions are not automatic liabilities, but rather a wonderful testament to the status of animal behavior in modern science. It's a huge and ever-expanding field. That's where we are today, and you can take it or leave it, former monkey mind doctors. Together, these studies, I think, also indicate some intriguing reasons why animal fables are fast gaining renewed interest, especially through approaches that affirm how old stories sometimes reflect and even pointedly challenge scientific orthodoxies about more than human capacities, particularly for even having a story, for being able to tell their story, share their stories among themselves, and potentially with us, again, if we knew how to ask the right questions. An added benefit to this development is when it subtly but firmly advances pro-animal politics by affirming literal ways of reading fabled animals as animals, and not just as metaphors for human ways of living. and human ways of being. To return to Nagai's reading of Skinner, it gives me hope that together we can do the desperately needed work of linking science and fable traditions to more than human justice initiatives. We need to acknowledge that animal storytelling may be quite different from our own, and even to get started with this work, for the devil is in the details. Thank you. I think we have time for questions. I hope we have time for questions. I didn't run us out. Come on, you can do it. I teach undergraduates. I have hours.
Okay. Do the answering and I'll go check the question.
Thank you. I feel privileged to be here and to listen to you, and thank you so much for that. And this is something I was thinking about also in relation to the other presentations, and perhaps it's not really a question, but a thought every time I'm thinking of and with other animals that it's not like myself. And I wonder how, because we often mirror ourselves in them, and the investigations we do or the research, we do that. And this negotiation and trying to get in contact with that. And I wonder whether these approaches we have into trying to get in contact sometimes is not only used to benefit ourselves, to show ourselves as having a different relationship to the world, but also how often we question ourselves as how these lives are actually being exploitable resources for the ideas we have. And so the question is, and this is something that maybe it's not really a question, but something that food for thought, and I don't really have an answer. But in the practice that we have, how do we negotiate as subjectives how much of the creative process and how much of the idea we have is actually our ideas, but not really the ideas of the other? And I don't know.
A fantastic question that I'm sure there are as many answers to as there are people in this audience, and then some. The first part of your question immediately made me think of a piece that I just recently saw the anthropologist Barbara King quoted in, and it was, I believe, a short article in Science Direct reflecting on the passing of the bonobo kanzi, who was the one who was in the signing ape study, who was the genius of everyone, and who was inadvertently trained to begin with because he was on his mother's breast and his mother was the research subject, and he just started signing with spontaneously, and everybody, it was like a real revelation, a real movement forward in the proof that there was the quantifying of their capacities for language. King's perspective, I think, is really, really helpful. She says, without these studies, we wouldn't know how very harmful these studies are to them, these study conditions are to them. And so what we've asked of these particular individuals in these studies is probably too much compared to what we learned from them. But what we, I hope, she says, have learned from them is not to replicate these studies anymore. It's done. And Povinelli's having his chimpanzees taken away from him. Also, well, I don't know that happened, but my assumption is he got out of it. Let's just say he got out of it. His getting out of it, I think, is reflective of, again, a movement in general in the right direction that is going to have some casualties along the way. And I think well-meaning scientists, well-meaning humanists, well-meaning artists make mistakes and learn from them. And the best we can do when we are those people is, I think, to try to share that and try to teach that, move it forward. But you're absolutely right. We can't forget the animals who've been suffering and sacrificed, and that's not a good word for it, made to pay the price for those lessons along the way. Thank you, though. Yeah, I think the rest of the few days we're here together, we're going to get more answers to the bigger question you asked, though.
Thank you, Susan. And that was great. I think one of the things that strikes me about that Barker and Povinelli book, is not just that there's an animal scientist, being reductive and wanting to defend his work and so on, but that he's aided by a humanist, like a folklorist, and that they've teamed up. And I guess that's not surprising in itself. Like, humanists have been just as, guilty of policing these things as the scientists, but it's like often for very different reasons, with the sciences wanting to defend a particular picture of nature or animality, and the humanists, defending a picture of human exceptionalism. So I wondered if you could comment on what might be the distinctive conditions now for like an alliance like that of, people from across the divides teaming up to defend the divide.
That's exactly what I avoided trying to speak about. So put your finger on it. Thank you. No, I have been thinking about this quite a lot. What even motivated me to go there in the first place? And thinking back, it really is. I'm here from the U.S. U.S. higher ed is really in a grim situation, as it is in many other places right now. The future doesn't look as bright as it once did. And as a result, people are being put in positions, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes involuntarily, of having to reinvent themselves. And I don't want to discount. I know I was making fun of him and playing up the Fomamindo character here, but there is a real sad story at the core of this, of someone who set out to do one thing, found himself in conditions that were doing something else, and now concedes that he shouldn't have been doing those things, but he's got to do something else too. And it's interesting to me that creativity has become part of the picture. It's interesting to me that he's reached across the divide. There are other things that a scientist in that position could have done that could have been much more quiet, much less public, we wouldn't be talking about this if he hadn't made the decisions that he made. So respect on that. I deleted that meme slide with the cat going respect. That was in the earlier draft. I think for me, that's becoming really compelling personally, because I'm looking down that barrel right now. And I'm also finding that I'm looking sideways and seeing real people I know in my life doing that too. And I'm kind of sad that it's not as often as public that we're having this kind of discussion at all, because otherwise, in that liberal humanist way, we're internalizing it as a personal failure, and that's wrong. That's wrong. That's really allowing the structural violence to grind us between the gears, when what we really need to be doing, I think, is reaching out and talking about how are we going to do this better? How are we going to learn from this again and move forward in a way that less get hurt moving forward too? So same answer, different question. Look at me on a roll here.
Very much. So I'm very interested in the relationships between scientists and storytelling, and the ways that writers and scientists can collaborate and communicate. I've generally looked at different styles of animal writing, and I'm and I'm really interested in what do you think are the characteristics of fables that would make them particularly desirable or relevant for that kind of work? Because I haven't really looked at fables, and I'm thinking that's been a big oversight.
No, it's a very good question, and I really think that Kari has some fantastic answers in the framing of this project altogether, and in many of the earlier lectures. I think I'm remembering Wim Penny, but I'm also remembering Tom Van Doren. I'm remembering other people in these. All of these are recordings that you can watch, do your homework, watch on your own time. And yeah, to me too, until Kari until she submitted her wonderful book manuscript to our series, I hadn't really been realizing how immediately relevant fables are to where we are right now, and thinking about how to get out of what Marxist literary critic Frederick Jameson, I think, correctly projected to be this capitalist nightmare of living in the eternal present right now, of having absolutely no sense of history. I think all of us who teach are really every second of every day moving forward with students realizing the horror of what that condition is and what that does to someone to have no sense that anything has come from anywhere and that anything can go, and that there's anything different from just the eternal present of consumer culture. It's terrifying, but that's how many young people live right now. And one way that I've reached out to them, one way that I'm teaching in conditions where students don't read anymore, is to show them funny videos and then bring them to the video and the text and the reading assignment that all had the same message all along, and that is in a different cultural context or a different historical context or a different, hey, wait a minute, it's not just us right now that have this crazy cat lady as a funny, not funny, that there's a Sylvia Plath poem about it. I could go on. But to me, the fable is just this wonderful gift that's been handed to us from not an ancestor, but a whole bunch of ancestors who may not be my direct ancestors, but they're lecturing apes too. They're like we want to be, and give me again a profound sense of hope that we can carry this forward. People in worse conditions, living wise, have carried this forward. We can do this. We got this. But only if we respect the ancestors and really think more carefully about what we're doing and the framework in which we're doing it. And I think Wim Penny is right. The public outreach of what academics are doing, the story that people tell about who we are and what we do, needs help too. And that fables are an important go-to for that kind of work. Again, if we can help to contextualize, help people to realize that they have these touch points beyond themselves, beyond buying stuff, beyond being on that TikTok. Oh, I sound old. I am old. I'm an old woman and I don't have a lot of time. As Elizabeth Costello's, another lecturing ape.
I think science and fables have not been that far apart, because even though scientists have this reputation as objectifying animals, if you read scientific and especially popular scientific works of the 19th and 18th century, they're just full of all kinds of fantastic anecdotes that, just told in a slightly different style, would be classified as fables. There are stories of sophisticated communities of beavers that, in Oliver Goldsmith's words, build like architect and rule like citizens with their own constitution and their own courts of law. There's all sorts of stories about dogs that solved murder mysteries, or turkeys that somehow moved to the Middle East and learned perfect Arabic, and all kinds of stories about apes that had sophisticated weapons, or apes that raped women, and so on and so forth. And well, one of the biggest tales like this was the popular scientist J.G. Wood, who probably the most popular writer on animals of all time. And I noticed that, his early works were just filled with these anecdotes, one after another. But then when Darwinism came along, the book suddenly changed, and he cut out all the anecdotes because suddenly they started to become threatening. But I think even today, scientists still, to an extent, continue to rely on these little stories that sometimes might be true or half true, but sound utterly fantastic. So I wonder if we need to rethink the relationship between the two.
Fair enough. Science in the public interest needs stories badly. And for those of you who don't know, Borea Sachs, your work is really wonderful in documenting this development, as is, I should have given a shout out to Candace Allmark-Kent, yours too, and many more folks. This is something that I think literary animal studies is actually doing a very good job of, making the case for, if you're going to do animal science moving forward, you better pay attention to the stories and better pay attention to diagnose the stories that people already have in their heads, to be able to make that change more widely accepted and understood and appreciated, for humans' good as scientists, for animals' good as research subjects, but way, way, way more than that too. But thank you for that observation.
Does anyone have further questions? I've got one more here. I'm just trying to get like a little listing of things at the moment. Okay, Nancy, I'm moving up.
It's not a real question, but just to thank you, because it was really fascinating talk, and I learned a lot of things. Thank you so much. I didn't like Povinelli long before. And I suspect that, what he did all his career was to destroy all possibilities for animal. For example, the mirror test that he did. And he just he just built exactly what made the elephant fail. And I think that the life of Povinelli is to try not to find what the animals are able to, but what we can find they are not able to, which is exactly the contrast of what Deleuze say about ethology. But I was just jumping on what's just said, Borea, and what you answer. It's just a reference that I want to give you, because I think it is interesting, and I didn't think about when I was preparing my own talk that I could have used that also. It was a very nice art paper by Jim Enderby. I don't know if you heard about it, Deceived by Orchids. And this paper is fantastic. I won't make the summary, it's just 2 few lines. He asked why in between 1916 and 1927, some biologists, specialists of plants, have resolved an enigma that was raised since Darwin and that nobody could solve, which was how do plants lure some insect while they don't give them anything. Even nectar was not in the contract. And nobody could solve that. And between 1916 and 1917, says Jim and Dombey, some phytobotanists, I mean biologists, found the solution independently. And he tried to find why they did it. It seems that biologists wrote books about plants, and back to the time, the plants, except the carnivorous one, that's why they were interested so much Darwin, they don't have any form of agency, except if you read Theodor Schwechner, but you know, that's
Absolutely.
marginal literature. But novelists like G.H. Wells, like a popular writer like Aline, and so on, were reading The Botanist and wrote some novels, and some terrible novels where the plants, orchid and so on, were luring people, were seducing them, sometimes were killing them, at least, and were full of agency. And then the biologist read these novels. And this opened the imagination to the fact that plants could have more agency than what they credit them. And then they thought about this enigma and saw that plants were actively luring insects. And probably they could, the gift that they have to give, it was a good moment of sexuality with insects. And I think it's so interesting that for me, that novelists could change the way scientific have imagined the way to shape the agency of the plants. And I think that Fables may sometimes do that.
Absolutely right. And that, I think, would have been the shadow second part of this, that I think you're absolutely right. The influence of not just the lecturing ape, but other fables, and particularly fabular plants, in terms of blowing our minds into what plant philosopher Michael Marder terms thinking without a head, distributed cognition, and other freaky things that they do. You're absolutely right, though, about the monstrous plants being that sort of knock-on effect from Darwin's own niche obsession with them. Yeah, I wrote a review essay on literature, or actually encyclopedia entry on literature and plants from the beginning to now, and that monstrous turn, I need to chase you down for that reference because that should have been in this, but that was my general sense too, without having exactly that particular study to back that up. But the monstrous vegetal still is among us, still is a source of fascination, and I think it still is fueling scientific interest in the capacities for plants, and also artistic interest too, and that those two generative sources of knowledge, of inspiration, really do. That's a wonderful example to illustrate how that continues moving forward. Thank you for that.
This conference is marvelous for the preaching to the converted. How can you reach out beyond the world? This conference is marvelous, but we're preaching to the converted. How can you or we reach out beyond the world of academia and educate the general public through stories and fables?
Ouch. Yeah, this is a huge question, I think, for academics, not just in this topic, but in general, and one student at a time. People don't want to hear us preaching at them. People want us to meet them where their interest points are, and looking for opportunities where people are seeking someone to lead a book club, seeking someone to, whatever it is, answer a question, give them a reading recommendation, follow up though, make sure that they've done their homework. Speaking to an academic crowd, that's the most grassroots and immediate way that we can do this. Check up on the little models in your social world. Put the phone down, show them that crazy animal video, but then show them the crazy animal poem. That's also, I can get you some cat lady stuff to get started with here. Anytime anyone wants something, but you gotta have a hook. And you gotta also have, hook is probably not the right term for it. You gotta have a sweetie to dangle. And once they go for that, then you give them the icky tasting medicine. No, that too is a bad metaphor. Oh, giddy, at the end of a long day. Big, huge question. Thank you, whoever from the internet who is asking this. It's very appreciated. And it is a question that I think all of us are taking away in our hearts and in our minds.